Hello, and welcome to the True Crime Lounge podcast. I do have a YouTube channel that you can go check out. I also have a Patreon that you can go and support, and the merch shop that you can go and buy something from. I know y'all want a t-shirt or something with true crime, right? By joining my Patreon, you'll receive early access to mini-series and season episodes that are scheduled to come out. I also have a Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter that you can follow for updates on my channel and podcast. Now let's dive into the irony here on the TCL podcast. We are officially in the finale of season 3, and I am excited to announce the theme of season 4 will be announced at the end of this episode. You thought I was going to announce at the beginning. I had to keep you guessing. This is probably going to be a long episode because today's episode because so much information on this guy. Um, I don't know what's going on with the neighbors upstairs. But today we are going to talk about one of the most known cases in the world, U.S. I know, possibly a world. And this guy was dubbed the Gray Man in the Werewolf of Wysteria, and he was a serial killer with some very disturbing characteristics that had inspired a lot of fictional characters. He is characterized by a sex pervert and participated in cannibalism, corpophilia, urophilia, pedophilia, and masochism. Albert Fish's number of victims range from 3 to 10, with the dates of the murders between 1924 and 1934. His methodology is stabbing with a knife and strangulation, and he was executed in Sing Sing prison in New York on January 16, 1936. He once boasted that he had a child in every state, putting a figure about 100, although it is not clear whether he's talking about molestation or cannibalism. Less still to whether it true or not. He was a suspect in at least 5 in his lifetime. He confessed to 3 murders that were able to trace back to the police known homicide, who confessed to stabbing at least 2. And he was put on trial for the kidnapping and murder of Grace Budd, and was convicted and executed by an electric chair. Hard to believe New York's still doing the death penalty. Please don't start an argument, please. It was just a comment. A terrible attempt at a joke, so please. But he was born Randall Fish to Randall Fish, and he is said to have been named after Hamilton Fish, a distant relative. And his father was 43, was 43 years older than his mom, and Fish was the youngest child of 3 siblings, Walter, Annie, and Edwin Fish. He wished to be called Albert after a dead sibling, to escape the name ham and eggs that he was given at an orphanage in which he spent many of his early years. Many members of his family had mental illness, and one suffered from religious mania, and his father was a riverboat captain. By 1870 he was a fertilizer manufacturer. The elder Fish died of a heart attack at the 6th Street Station and Pennsylvania Railroad, 1875 in Washington, D.C. His mom was put him in an orphanage, and he was frequently whipped and beaten there, and eventually discovered that he enjoyed the physical pain. The beatings would often give him erections, for which the other orphans teased him. So, by 1879, his mom got a job, and was able to look after him. However, this various experiences before this affected him. He started a gay relationship in 1882 at the age of 12 with a telegraph boy. He also introduced Fish to such practices as drinking urine and colprophagia. And he began visiting baths where he could watch boys undress, and spent a large portion of his weekends on these visits. So by 1890, he had arrived in New York City and he became a male prostitute. He also said that he was raping young boys, a crime that he kept committing even after his mom arranged a marriage. In 1898, he was married to a woman 9 years his junior. Together they had 6 children: Albert, Anna, Gertrude, Eugene, John, and Henry Fish. He was arrested for embezzlement and sentenced to incarceration in Sing Sing in 1903. He regularly had sex with men while in prison. Throughout 1898, he was a house painter and he is said to continue molesting boys, mostly boys under 6, and he later recounted an incident in which a male lover took him to a waxworks museum, where Fish was fascinated by a bisection of his, you know, yeah, I'm not gonna say it, mainly because, yeah, you can fill in the blank. And he developed a morbid interest in cannibalism, and during the relationship with a mentally retarded man, he attempted to castrate him, tying him up. The man became frightened and fled, and Fish began intensifying his visits to brothels and where he would be whipped and beaten more often. In January 1917, his wife left him for John Strobe, a handyman who boarded with the Fish family. Following this rejection, he began to hear voices. For example, he once wrapped himself in the carpet, explaining that he had following the instructions of John the Apostle. Hmm. Fish committed what have what yeah. Let me try that again. He committed what may have been his first attack on a child named Thomas Bennett in Wilmington, Delaware in 1910. Afterward, he stabbed a mentally retarded boy in 1919 in Georgetown. Consistently, many of his intended victims would either be mentally retarded or African American, because he believed that they would not be missed. He was definitely a product of his time. So, on July 11, 1924, he found 8-year-old Beatrice Kell playing alone on her parents' Staten Island farm, and he offered her money to come help him for a rubber in the neighboring fields. And she was about to leave the farm when the mother chased him away. But Fish left but returned to the Kell's barn where he had tried to sleep the night before being discovered by Hans Kell and was told to leave. Now, you mentioned that he was involved with the murder of Grace Spud, right? Well, on May 25th, 1928, Edward Dudd put a classified ad in the Sunday edition of the New York World that read, "Young man 18 wishes position in country. Edward Budd, 406 15th Street." And on May 28, 1928, Fish, who was then 58, visited the Budd farm in Manhattan under the pretense of hiring Edward, and he introduced him as Frank Howard, a farmer from Farmingdale, New York. When he arrived, Fish met Budd's younger sister, 10-year-old Grace. This is sick, yes, I know. And he would send for him in a few days. On his second visit, he agreed to hire Budd to convince the parents, Delia Flanagan and Albert Budd, the first, to let Grace accompany them to the birthday party that evening at his sister's house. And Albert Sr. was a porter for the Equitable Life Insurance Society. Grace had a sister, Beatrice, two other brothers, Albert Budd II and George Budd. Fish left with Grace that day, but never came back. The police arrested Charles Edward Pope on September 5, 1930, as a suspect in the kidnapping. He was a 66-year-old apartment house attendant, and he was accused by his estranged wife. He spent 100 days in jail between his arrest on December 22, 1930. 7 years later, in November 1934, an anonymous letter was sent to the girl's parents, which led the police to Albert Fish, Mr. Dudd, who was illiterate, could not read the letter herself. Mrs. Spud. She was illiterate. She could not read a letter herself, so she had her son do it. Fish later admitted to the attorney that he did indeed rape Grace. He was also a compulsive liar, so this may have been untrue. He may have told the police when asked that it could never even enter his head to rape the girl. This guy is sick. And yet here I am talking about him. That's just weird, right? Yeah, I know. This letter was in an envelope to a small hexagonal emblem with the letters NYPCBA, standing for the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. A janitor at the company told the police that he had taken some of the stationery home but left it at the rooming house when he moved out. The landlady of the rooming house said that Fish had checked out the room a few days earlier, and she said that Fish's son sent him money and he asked him to hold his next check for him. And William F. King, the lead investigator, waited outside the room until he returned. He agreed to the headquarters for questioning, but the street door longed at King with a razor in each hand, and King disarmed Fish and took him to the police headquarters. Fish made no attempt to deny the Grace Budd murder, saying that he had meant to kill Edward Bird, Grace's brother. So, we know about this. What about some of his post-capture discoveries? Well, one of them was Billy Gaffey, who was playing in the hallway outside his family's apartment in Brooklyn with a friend, and Billy Beaton on February 11th, 1927. Both of the boys disappeared, but the friend on the roof of the apartment house, when asked, was headed to Gaffney. Beaton said that the Boogey Man took him. Initially, Peter Kowalski, I think that's how you pronounce it, I'm terrible with names, was a suspect in the murder of Billy Gaffney. And then Joseph Meehan, a motorman on the Brooklyn trolley, saw a picture of Fish in the newspaper and identified him as the man on February 11, 1927. Gaffney's body was never recovered. Billy's mother visited Fish in Sing Sing to try to get details on her son's death. So, Fish married on February, he had a previous incarceration, so he married on February 6, 1930 at Waterloo, New York, to Miss Estella Wilcox is her pseudonym, and divorced after 1 week. He had been arrested in May 1930, sending an obscene letter to an African American woman who answered an advertisement for a maid. He was sent to a Bellevue psychiatric hospital in 1930 and 1931 for observation following his arrest. So, at his trial for a premeditated murder of Grace Budd began on Monday, March 11, 1935, in White Plains, New York, with Frederick P. Close as a judge. The trial lasted for 10 days, and Fish would plead insanity and claim to have heard voices of God telling him to kill children. Several psychiatrists testified about his sexual fetishes, including many of the philias and the ism I said earlier. But there was a disagreement as to whether the activities were meant to be insane. And the defense's chief expert witness was Frederick Wertham, a psychiatrist with a focus on child development, who conducted psychiatric examinations for New York criminal courts. He stated that Fish was insane. Another defense witness, who was Mary Nicholas, Fish's 17-year-old stepdaughter, and she described how Fish taught her and her brothers and sisters a game involving overtones and misogynism of child molestation. The jury found him sane and guilty. After being sentenced, Fish confessed to the murder of 8-year-old Francis, the ex's 10th, yeah. Francis 10th McDonald killed in Staten Island, and Francis was playing on the front porch of the home near Port Richmond, Staten Island, July 15, 1994. Francis' mom saw an old man walking up by clenching and unclenching his fist. Fish denied involvement with other murders, but he was a suspect in 3. Detective William King believed Fish had been the Brooklyn Vampire, a rapist and murderer who mainly preyed on kids. And they were 1927 Yetter Abelwitz, who was 12, in the Bronx. She was strangled and beaten to death on the roof of a 5-story building. In 1932, Mary Ellen O'Connor, who was 16, and who was in Queens, and her mutilated body was found in the woods and disclosed. In 1932, Benjamin Coolings, age 17. But that is an overview of this guy. Like, I could do probably like a whole series on this guy if I wanted to. But for everybody else's time and my time, because I am busy with school and everything by the time this episode is recorded, we're gonna have to go with an overview. But that is it for today's episode. I will see y'all in our next mini series or maybe YouTube episode. I haven't decided yet, but I did promise. The theme for season 4 is going to be Alabama murderers. Yes. Which ones do you think I will be doing? Let me know, but I will see y'all next time and y'all have a great day.